Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Go With You Go podcast. It is so good to be here with you all. It is Black History Month. But first things first, I tell everybody every month is Black History Month. We love it, yeah. But we have February specifically for Black History Month in America here. I have a very special guest as well, too, Mr. Ellwood Johnson, an educator himself. Mr. Johnson, welcome to the Go With You Go podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Ego. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on the show. I'll let you do the honors. Tell my audience about yourself. Tell us something exciting about you, what you want us to get to know about you.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, my name is Ellwood Johnson. I currently teach English and chair the English department here at Cristo Jesuit High School here in Baltimore, Maryland. In addition to chairing the department and teaching English there, I also teach English and writing at a number of colleges throughout the Baltimore, sort of Washington D.C. metro area. And my background is sort of literature, right? English literature, bachelor's degree, master's degree. Academic-wise, I'm sort of interested in 19th and 20th century British fiction, postcolonial studies, and Black diasporic literature and studies. So that's sort of my academic interest, and those things sort of inform my teaching, right? My approach to teaching, topics that I teach with students and in the classroom. So again, I'm happy to be here, especially during this Black History Month.
Right, it's absolutely great to have you here. What does Black History Month mean to you? And why is it important for us to celebrate and acknowledge the achievements and the contributions of Black people?
So to me, Black History Month is about awareness. For me, it's about awareness of Black people here in the U.S. specifically, but I think more than that, it's about the awareness of sort of Black cultures and Black peoples globally throughout the world. And I think that's reflected in sort of the change from African American History Month, which is sort of how, right, this month sort of started, to what it is right now, which is Black History Month, which I think in some ways is more, in many ways, it's more encompassing, right? It's more encompassing of like who is included, right, in this marker of Black, right, and Blackness. So to me, I think it really is about awareness of how far we've come, right, of people sort of African descent or Black people globally. And I think it's important to celebrate Black History Month because celebrating is a way of ensuring that we can continue, right, this legacy of awareness. I think celebrating it, not about dedicating a single month per se, but it's really about making sure that we use this month to be intentional about awareness of sort of, right, political gains, educational gains, sort of all of the gains that Black people globally have sort of fought for so that we could be where we are today. And so I think this month, again, to me, is about awareness and sort of being intentional about celebrating that history, not just so that we can view it as history, but I think so that we can use that history to inform choices and decisions and sort of goals for the future.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you for that. And so what are some of the Black leaders, activists, educators, and pioneers that have inspired you specifically, and why are they significant in your view?
Sort of pre-civil rights, I would say Black intellectuals of the earlier 20th century. I would say people like W.E.B. Du Bois, philosopher, thinker, sociologist, first sort of Black PhD graduate at Harvard. W.E.B. Du Bois, because he sort of theorized, right, came up with a framework for the struggle of Black people in the 20th century in this country. Specifically, this idea of, right, the double consciousness, this idea that because of slavery, because of racism, Black people are always constantly looking at themselves, right, through the eyes of other people, right? There's this constant sort of split in how they understand themselves and the way that they understand the world to see them. So I think people like Du Bois for sure, of course, civil rights leaders, right? Martin Luther King. I think about educators like Shirley Chisholm, who was sort of an educator during the sort of 70s, 60s and 70s. And she really sort of advocated for educational policy changes in sort of urban Black communities, right? At a time when we were sort of thinking about the space race and sort of all of these other things that the country could invest money in. It was a moment where a teacher also sort of involved and invested in politics and sort of advocating for educational change alongside all of these national and global and international issues. The English teacher and as a person who is deeply interested in the connection between books and culture and literature, I would have to say Toni Morrison, just as a sort of writer who has channeled the Black American experience that haven't happened before and haven't happened since her writing. I would say Toni Morrison is a sort of pioneer for celebrating a model of Black history from within, right? From thinking about what things do we as a community value us and about ourselves, and how do we uphold those things and celebrate those things without sort of looking in, right? So not thinking about what other people outside of the community value, but the things that we value for ourselves. So how do we sort of claim this space that somehow is marginal and make it the center? So I would say, again, Du Bois, Martin Luther King, Toni Morrison, and then there are so many other people. Like I said, Shirley Chisholm is an educator, Bell Hooks, who we recently lost in 2020. Just a list of people who I think are constantly on my mind as I do the work of teaching today.
What role do you think education plays in preserving and promoting the legacy of Black people? And what steps do you think need to be taken to ensure that Black history is accurately and fairly represented in the curriculum we have today?
The role of education is to make sure that we understand Black history, but also our collective history, especially thinking about America, right? As you mentioned at the start of this interview, is inseparable from American history. And so thinking about in terms of math or science or whatever the content area is, the role of education is to make sure that current generations and future generations sort of have access to education. And I think when it comes to Black history, I think that needs to be a part of it, right? I don't think you can have American history or history in schools with education that includes the history of Black people. And when I think about the sort of whole discussion about critical race theory, I think about what we're realizing is that education is powerful, and the people who attempt to restrict access to education or who attempt to draw lines around what teachers and students can learn in the classroom, I think that speaks volumes to the power of education, because right there they're recognizing that education has the potential to create change, right? And so if they can get their hands on it and shape it, doing is shaping future minds, shaping future outcomes, future countries. And so I think it's really important that we make smart decisions and we make thoughtful decisions about curriculum and about how we educate our students, an eye toward our goal for the future.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. When we look at the history from where we were slavery to where we are today, a lot has changed, but not fast enough, not good.
It starts with awareness ultimately, right? And a second ago, how far we've come, from the founding days of this country and from sort of slavery and movement. But what Black people are doing and need to continue to do and become aware of that history and the struggles and the problems that we face, right? So we've overcome so many challenges and obstacles, and that's sort of tremendous and that's noteworthy. It's really important to sort of continue to remain aware of the struggles that we once faced, right? Knowing that we overcame those struggles. And I think that it's important to educate ourselves about what are the financial problems sort of facing Black people right now? What are the social issues plaguing, Black people right now? And as a global Black community, as Black people all over the world, we need to think about those issues, the issues that we face on a day-to-day. We need to in places and have people who are aware of those issues sort of rally around them and attempt to think about how to create change. I think W.E.B. Du Bois's concept of the talented 10th, and we can debate this whole idea about, is it just 10% of the global Black population who is responsible for sort of leading the race, right? Leading Black people through these issues that we face. But his point in the talented 10th was this idea that a portion of, right, the Black group, right, the Black populace must sort of be in sort of shaping our concerns about the challenges of the day. It is raising awareness through a podcast like I Go With Ego, or whether it is through making sure that we are resourceful on health disparities in the Black community, whether it's raising awareness of sort of how to sort of models for financial sustainability and success, who sources and have the means and the education sort of owe it not really to the community. You do owe it to the community, but I think you owe it to yourself in a way too, right? That you've accumulated this knowledge and this information. The question becomes now, what do you do with it? Are you going to take it and spread it, right? Are you going to give it back? Are you going to help other people sort of gain access to the same informational resources that you were able to have? So I think it's really about awareness and collaboration, about what things can we do within our control. And I think policy is one part of that, right? That's the biggest issue of sort of policy and legislation. But I think there are many grassroots things that people of color all over the world are already doing, are sort of subtly and slowly changing the course of history. I think you said it a second ago, how sort of, it's not happening as fast as we want it to, but I certainly think it's happening.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched about policy, because I'm very big on policy. I believe that policy, it's one thing for us to push for it. That's why today I'm excited to see lots of Black people in Congress. Because we have our first, vice president, a Black person. We've had our first President Obama. There's so much things to do. And if you notice, whenever there's an improvement or a step forward in Black history, always like 5 steps push back from people of other colors with regards to the successes we've made. And it's not just about respect. So how can we ensure that the legacies of Black leaders, of Black educators, of activists and pioneers is passed down to the future generations?
I think one of the most powerful ways to preserve things that you're talking about, right? These are Black sort of politicians, right? All of the sort of things that are happening outside of education. I think that's where intellectuals come in. I think that's where our Black artists come in, our Black sort of cultural thinkers come in. History belongs to the person who tells the story, right? And so I think that's where our music, our art, right, our hands come in, right? All of these people who are capturing made, right? So right now you're talking about Kamala, being the first sort of Black female vice president. And there's like so many Black first, even right now, it's sad to say in the 21st century, we still are having Black first, but here we are. But I think, we owe it to our historians to, write those biographies, to sort of, make the art so that all of these things that we have achieved, right? I think if we don't record them, and then sort of leaving that history open to somebody else. And I think partly that's where education comes in. But as you can see, it's hard to sort of mandate histories be told within the curriculum in schools. And so I think it's up to the community. It's up to, right, these people like you who are recording podcasts and making sure that we have these conversations. One of the biggest ways that this is passed down, and I think we're seeing it from everywhere, from music awards, right? Again, to Black First, right, in the White House, and people are writing the books. There are books about it that's happening right now that's reporting this history, not fiction necessarily, even nonfiction. So our journalists, cultural workers, our artists, our intellectuals, and then right in our houses with our kids, our families, our communities, I think we all sort of have a role to make sure we spread this knowledge. It doesn't always have to be formal, right? It doesn't always have to be connected to a degree. I think home and the community are with each other, are places or spaces where we can sort of share this information.
Yeah, if there's anything I'm big on people voting. Please vote where you can. It's the power to change everything that you want to change. So please vote. In 21st century, we have a Black first today. Super Bowl, Black quarterbacks are playing in the Super Bowl, the first time.
Absolutely, and I think you're right to that point. I think our sports journalists and all the people who are out here covering today, right? I'm certain that they're talking about right? Sort of the Black first the quarterbacks right now, even at this game that's happening today. And I think that's an amazing world right now with technology where, even 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it would be hard to record some of the stuff that's happening because we have to wait for the media to pick up a story and for it to make its way to the headlines of the newspapers. But right now, I think I'm a sort of cultural harbinger of of these stories and this information. So for instance, something can happen in one part of the world right now, and then it can get to us, right, wherever we are in this moment. And so I think we just are in such a ripe space to sort of receive all of this stuff that's happening. So I think it's important that we take it in and that we sort of internalize it and do something, like talk about it, record it, write it, just sure that it's there for our, that we record our own sort of history. And I know I say our own history, but it's all of our history, right? It might be Black history, but there's no real way to sort of separate Black history from any other history.
I agree completely. The experience, a personal story that has shaped your understanding of Black history and your lived experience as a Black person in America.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. There are many sort of experiences that have sort of shaped me personally, but I think, I hate to be so cliche about it, but I think has been a really, really key figure, the way I think of thinkers and intellectuals, but also she has been key in sort of my perception of myself and my relationship to, and I'll explain what I mean by this in a second, but she's been key in shaping my understanding of sort of myself as a Black American person, and sort of my action to other Black globally. So I'll say a little bit about that. Morrison was sort of born and raised at the University of Washington D.C. for undergrad, where she studied English and theater, received an English at Cornell. She years at colleges or universities. She was the first Black woman to win a prize in literature. First Black woman to hold a senior editor role at Random House, which is a major publishing company. And she played a role during the Civil Rights Movement in sort of bringing Black artists and writers into the pub business, right? She worked with people like Muhammad Ali and Angela Davis. She was she felt like she wasn't on the lines of the Civil Rights Movement, sort of doing the groundwork. And so for her, it was really important as a senior editor to make sure that the stories were getting recorded. And so she was sort of pitching and soliciting the Black writers and intellectuals so that their stories could be recorded and make it into mainstream publishing. And so to think of, just this idea as a teacher, I sort of am thinking about what is within my purview, right? Within my scope, what resources do I have that I can make available to the students that I have today, right? Like sort of how am I making sure that I give them access to resources that I may not know that they need right now, but can use them with some of our next Black leaders and thinkers. So in that way, I always think like, how important is teaching English in a time where, so much is happening politically and economically. And I just sort of think about, well, what's the importance of books, right? What am I trying to do with this? But I think you asked a second ago, how do we make sure that this history is sort of preserved and passed down, right? And so I see myself in that way, like Toni Morrison as an editor, as this sort of cultural, not icon, but as this sort of cultural figure who can do the work of, making sure that people have a space, a seat at the table, making sure that voices get represented. And really key in this sort of idea of thinking about how to preserve, right, the history of the community. And then I will say this last point. I think she, also, so she's always sort of been great about incorporating into her Black American fiction this sort of global Black perspective. So having, these moments in her fiction that forces you to think about what does it mean to be American in the 21st century, when we have people who are still sort of migrating, right, from so many African countries, where the overlaps and the points of convergence, you know, give an answer to that, but she sort of forced me to wrestle with and think about what, you know, the complexity of Black identity, I think, especially in the 21st century right now. And I think for me, that shapes a lot about, you know, how I interact with other groups of Black people who may be Black Americans, who may not be Black Americans, right? And so there, but I think Toni Morrison, certainly James Baldwin, it's been a lot of leaders who have made me sort of think about, you know, what Blackness means to me. Who am I as a Black person, as a Black American? Where do I fit into the larger image of Black people in the diaspora in general, which I think is key to thinking about the future of, you know, Black people in America specifically.
Even as it's, you know, what you just said, that the first century to America, what does history have for me? You know, and so comes as we each year, each month, daily, we have new stories to be told, and we hope that they'll be told in a way that befits the people. You know, and we hope it will be told in a way that when the future generation reads about it, they can say, hey, the folks before us did a great job. Just the way we idolized Nelson Mandela, MLK, and the rest of them. You know, we hope the future will be kind to us. Before I let you...
around every year.
Right.
Every year, what we do is we point to a specific sort of historical moment and we say, oh, the civil rights movement, let's celebrate those thinkers. Or we say the Harlem Renaissance, let's celebrate those thinkers. Or we say, you know, people at the early 20th century, let's celebrate those people. But I think sometimes we forget how much history is being made in between each Black History Month that we celebrate from year to year, right? So I think there's so many Black people globally in the US and in other, you know, places in the world who are making history right now. And so let's not forget to include them and celebrate them this Black History Month, right? Or next Black History Month next year, because of lots of history is being made between one year and the next.
I agree. Thank you so much. Well, it's the month of love. It's amazing how Black History Month falls in February, the month of love. So is there anyone you want to give a shout out to, or people you want to give a shout out to? Or before, and also when you do this, what words of advice do you have for any Black kid out there wondering and struggling what next for them? What words do you have for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to give a shout out to my family, to my husband, and then of course to my students. I have to give a shout out to my students. As a teacher and as an educator, forced me to think. They forced me, what does it educate, right? What does it mean to learn? They forced me to learn myself, right? Because as I think about how to educate my students or how to help them have meaningful educational experiences, I have to go out here and read and research and do the work. And so in some ways, as much as the teacher relationship is about teaching the students, I have to say that they really do teach and enable me to sort of be this thinker, to be this person who I enjoy being. And so to my students, to students in general, is to find something you love, right? Find something that you love to do, find something that you feel is meaningful or valuable to you. And after it, right? It might be something as simple as sort of finding a line of work, or it might be, you know, more complicated than that. But I would say find something that you value, find something that you're interested in, and surround yourself with people who want to hear those things and people want to exchange ideas with you. I think Black History Month being a month of awareness and a month of love, then I think we have to spread awareness and we have to spread love. So we have to take those things in and we have to surround ourselves with people who are interested in hearing what we have to say, but who are also interested in sharing their love and their awareness with us.
Well, there you go. Thank you so very much. That was a wonderful way to wrap this episode. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. It was great to have you on the show. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. I'm so happy that I could be here. It's a pleasure. I enjoy talking to you as always.
Absolutely.
Until next time.
Same here. Thank you. Well, to everyone out there,